I'm Nima Rajan. Describing a strike at the Port of Montreal as a matter of life and death, Federal Labor Minister Philomena Tassi has tabled controversial back-to-work legislation aimed at getting 1,150 dock workers back on the job. Yet while opposition parties and the workers' union criticized the measure, the bill appeared poised to pass with support from the Conservatives. Operations at the Port of Montreal came to a halt with Monday morning's walkout, causing a complete shutdown at one of Canada's busiest ports. And there were nearly 7,100 new confirmed cases of COVID-19 reported countrywide on Tuesday, bringing the total number reported since the pandemic began to nearly 1,195,000 cases. There were 55 new reported deaths on Tuesday for a national death toll of 24,065. The hotspots were Ontario with nearly 3,300 new infections, and Alberta reported over 1,500. Today, Ontario's health minister says hospitals will be able to transfer patients waiting for a long-term care bed to any nursing home without their consent in an effort to free up space. Another 256,000 COVID-19 vaccinations were administered across the country yesterday, making for more than 12.5 million doses given to Canadians so far.
I had a good conversation with President Biden last week on this and other topics. Canada is positioned to receive close to 50 million doses of vaccine before the end of June. So it is all a question of timing. We know that we have capacity to deliver vaccines immediately into more arms as we can get more vaccine doses into Canada. So we are continuing to work every single day to try and get those doses into Canada to increase our capacity on vaccination.
The first 300,000 doses of Johnson & Johnson's COVID-19 vaccine are arriving in the country today. The doses will arrive as the country reported nearly 7,100 new COVID-19 cases yesterday. Well, meanwhile, as the third wave of the COVID-19 pandemic sweeps across Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says dozens of military and federal public service health officials are being deployed to Ontario and Nova Scotia. Discussions are underway with Alberta to send workers there as well. The Prime Minister says 60 troops have been sent to Nova Scotia to help out at COVID-19 testing centres, and 6 nurses and 3 doctors from Newfoundland and Labrador are helping in hospitals in the Greater Toronto area. Meanwhile, Justin Trudeau says any Oxford-AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccines coming to Canada from the U.S. will not be at the expense of doses that would be going to India. The White House has said it will share an estimated 60 million surplus shots with the rest of the world. The PM says it's not about taking vaccines from the rest of the world, but moving up timings and exchanging doses so Canada can finish its inoculation program more quickly and move to supporting other countries. The launch of a long-awaited, legally required parliamentary review of Canada's assisted dying regime is being stalled by Senate bickering on who will co-chair the special joint committee. 4 senators have been chosen to sit on the committee by 3 of the 4 Senate groups, but they are all waiting for the Conservative Senate caucus to name its single member. Conservative Senator Leader Don Plett says there was an agreement among Senate leaders to have a Conservative co-chair, but that the Progressive and Independent Senators groups reneged on it. Prime Minister Trudeau says his chief of staff has been instrumental in pushing the federal government to become more feminist, and she did not know that a complaint 3 years ago against then Defense Chief General Jonathan Vance was about sexual misconduct. Mr. Trudeau defended Katie Telford among questions about what he and his office knew about the claims. Former Trudeau advisor Elder Marquis suggested to a parliamentary committee last week that Ms. Telford was aware of an allegation against General Vance, but could not recall whether the sexual nature of the complaint was known. Federal Conservative leader Erin O'Toole says he's simply in listening mode concerning the idea of making voting mandatory in Canada. Mr. O'Toole said at a virtual event earlier this month that he does not support electoral reform toward proportional representation, but he admits he's been looking at how Australia, where voter turnout is relatively high, requires its citizens to go to the polls or risk a modest fine. A special Commons committee on electoral reform has previously examined mandatory voting and recommended against such a format for Canada. Netflix has chosen Toronto as the spot for its previously announced Canadian corporate office. A publicist for the California-based streaming giant says the company will post a content executive job for the new office in June. Netflix had been eyeing Toronto and Vancouver for an office since the streamer shoots several productions in both markets. A representative from the company said Toronto made sense for a variety of reasons, including a plethora of talent, partners, and international festivals in the city. All right, coming up after the break, a deeper look into the strike at the Port of Montreal and what that means for the rest of the country. Stay with us. More than 1,000 dock workers at the Port of Montreal began a strike on Monday, a move that the Port Authority said would mean the total shutdown of all port operations. The move was aiming to put pressure on the Maritime Employers Association to reach a contract with dock workers because they haven't had one since December 2018. Federal Labor Minister Philomena Tassi has tabled controversial back-to-work legislation aimed at getting the 1,150 dock workers back on the job. Well, to talk more on the significant impact the strike has on not only the economy, but trade and international commitments, we are joined by Brendan Caldwell, Director of Caldwell Securities Limited. Welcome back to Forum Daily, Brendan.
Morning, Nima.
Now, this isn't the first time that a strike was held at the Port of Montreal. There was a similar strike action back in the summer of 2020. So what kind of economic and logistical impact did the 2020 strike have on Canada's economy?
Well, it wasn't great. Now, when you say it's not the first time it's happened, it's not the first time it's happened during COVID. So we are all in this together, yet the federal government that owns the Port of Montreal and the dock workers can't seem to get it together in a critical lynch point for our economy. So we're all in this together, except we're not. So the impact on the economy was tremendous. It's hundreds of millions of dollars of goods is left on the docks. I was talking last night to the owner of a medical and healthcare supply company who's had hand sanitizers and others just sitting by the docks because of a global shutdown in trade. Or it's already been challenging enough to get goods from other parts of the world because of issues the other parts of the world are having, both nationalistic and logistic. So for Canada to be competitive, we have to literally be all in this together, as opposed to fighting amongst ourselves. Because if we do not hang together, to borrow from Benjamin Franklin, if we do not hang together, we shall all surely hang separately.
Now, this is Canada's second largest port we're talking about. So how would this impact already stressed supply chains and deliveries for companies across Canada?
It's not great, Nima. Again, getting goods out of parts of the world, particularly China, has been challenging, but all countries have had their supply chains disrupted. And what we've really learned through this pandemic is that we all depended on each other. For this world to function, if you don't like the buzzword globalization, fine, we'll change it. But for us to exist as a species on this planet, we have to work together. And I understand that countries that are doing less well than Canada are having a hard time making that working well happen. But here in Canada, it's not been great, but it's not been as bad as the rest of the world. And we need to be able to find ways to make our ports, our infrastructure work so that at least internally we can work together and externally we put our best foot and face forward for working with and indeed competing with the rest of the world.
Now, considering the future impacts of this, we saw certain shipping lines diverting their routes from the Port of Montreal to competing ports due to the uncertainty of the summer 2020 strike. What does a second major strike in less than a year mean for the future success of the port itself, Brendan?
Well, it's not good for Canada as a whole. It's not good for Quebec specifically. I imagine that more business is going west to Vancouver, even to Toronto, perhaps to Halifax. So for Quebec, which has been in recovery mode for a long time. And keep in mind, COVID's hit Quebec harder than any other province in this nation. To get this, when I said about Canada, I don't want to tell Quebec how to do its business, but within its own province, it's got to work together to be able to compete. Otherwise, CN and CP and the different rail lines will need to ship to other ports, and that doesn't help Quebec. And they need it more than any other province in this country right now.
Right, Brendan. Now, we've got a little over a minute left, but I really want to bring this back home to our Canadian viewers now. How would a strike like this impact Canadian families in particular?
Well, I think emotionally to start with, many people have lost their jobs, lost their businesses, and if the federal government and a federal union, which is what the dock workers are, can't get it together, and it's not as though the dock workers haven't been paid, it's just they haven't had a contract since 2018. So if they can't get it together and work together, then what does that mean emotionally, let alone financially, and in terms of getting hand sanitizers and anything else they need for Canadian families that really are suffering, that haven't been paid, that have lost their businesses or lost their jobs? It is a very stressful time, and I cannot say this enough. We as a country, Quebec as a province, all of the provinces together have to work together because it's challenging for us. It's even more challenging for the rest of the world. And if we're going to face the rest of the world and indeed compete with the rest of the world, we have to work together, and that is a non-negotiable.
All right, Brendan, always great having you on Forum Daily. Thank you again for your time today. BC has lowered its age restriction for the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine to allow those aged 30 and older to get the shot. Health Minister Adrian Dix and Provincial Health Officer Dr. Bonnie Henry say in a statement that the vaccine will be made available across the province, starting in hotspots, once there are enough doses to add to more pharmacy appointments. Last week, the National Advisory Committee on Immunization recommended the vaccine may be offered to people 30 and up who didn't want to wait for an approved mRNA vaccine. Alberta Health Services says it will reduce scheduled surgical activity up to 30% in the Edmonton, Calgary and North zones due to rising COVID-19 cases. The province says it will also reduce some non-urgent procedures and ambulatory appointments. Alberta Health Services says the change will allow hospitals to expand inpatient beds if necessary and create more capacity for COVID-19 cases requiring hospitalization. There are over 20,000 active cases of COVID-19 in the province, the second highest total since the pandemic began. Saskatchewan's children's advocate says COVID-19 has made it difficult for her office to do its job over the past year. In a report, Lisa Broda says in many cases, regular visits with children and youth in group homes, foster care and youth custody facilities were impossible. She says unpredictable and changing school environments are taking a toll on children and youth. Ms. Broda says in many cases, students haven't been able to receive a full year of proper learning, and kids struggle to get an education online. She says having to rely on parents and childcare centers is taking a toll. Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe says a partnership with North Dakota will see about 2,000 provincial residents who regularly cross the border get vaccinated in the U.S. North Dakota is already vaccinating truck drivers at the Manitoba boundary. Premier Moe says a site near a Saskatchewan border crossing will be established soon. More than 1,000 inmates in Manitoba jails will be offered COVID-19 vaccines this week. Immunization teams have set up clinics at Headingley Correctional Centre, the Milner Ridge Correctional Centre, and then will move on to the Brandon Correctional Centre. Last week, COVID-19 vaccines were offered to 155 people at the Winnipeg Remand Centre and eligible recipients at the Manitoba Youth Centre. Manitoba jails are some of the last facilities to be visited under the province's plan to immunize people who live in congregate settings. Toronto Mayor John Tory says the city's film and television production industry is second to none anywhere in the world. And so he's not surprised that Netflix has chosen Toronto to house its previously announced Canadian corporate office. A publicist for the California-based streaming giant tells the Canadian press that it will post a content executive job for the new office in June. Mr. Tory says Netflix spends over $200 million a year shooting shows in Toronto, including The Umbrella Academy and Lock and Key. Quebec health officials are pressing on with their vaccination program, stressing the benefits of the Oxford AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine still outweighs the risks. The reaffirmation in the vaccine's general safety and effectiveness followed the province's announcement yesterday that a woman in her 50s died of a blood clot that she developed after she received the AstraZeneca shot. Public Health Director Dr. Horatio Arruda says rare complications are always possible. Health Minister Christian Dubé says the province is probing a total of 4 cases of serious complications out of 400,000 people who have received the shot. The Canadian Automobile Association has released its annual list of the worst roads in Atlantic Canada. Roads in Newfoundland hold the top 2 spots, with the Terra Nova Road in Terra Nova taking top honors and Route 410 in the island's northern coast placing second. The top 5 worst roads include Scotch Lake Road in New Brunswick, Markland Road in Colonet, Newfoundland, and Sherwood Road in Mapledale, New Brunswick. Nova Scotia's government has ordered a province-wide lockdown starting at 8 a.m. local time today to stem a record surge in COVID-19 cases. The province's 96 new infections Tuesday was its highest daily case count since the pandemic began. Halifax Mayor Mike Savage tells CTV News Atlantic, while businesses will certainly be affected by the shutdown, the bold action must be taken for public health. For the next 2 weeks, all schools, gyms, and non-essential indoor services in Nova Scotia will be closed. Restaurants will be limited to only takeout and delivery, and only stores selling essential items will be open to in-person shopping. Newfoundland and Labrador has jabbed over a third of its population with at least 1 dose of a COVID-19 vaccine. According to the province's COVID-19 update hub, over 155,000 people had at least 1 dose of a vaccine. That accounts for nearly 34% of people in the province. Newfoundland and Labrador have approximately over 462,000 people eligible for vaccination. News from around the world coming up after the break. India's death toll from the COVID-19 virus passes 200,000. President Biden signs an executive order for an increase in minimum wage, and Chinese vaccine makers consider ways to improve efficacy. These stories and more when we return on the Forum Daily. The COVID-19 death toll in India topped the 200,000 mark today as the country endures the pandemic's worst hit yet. The health ministry reported nearly 3,300 more deaths Wednesday, bringing India's total fatalities to nearly 201,200. India has the 4th most deaths behind the United States, Brazil, and Mexico. Experts, however, believe the numbers in this current surge are an undercount. Patients are suffocating because hospitals' oxygen supplies have run out. U.S. President Joe Biden will use his first joint address to Congress tonight to pitch a $1.8 trillion investment in children, families, and education that would transform the role government plays in American life. He will lay out a sweeping proposal for universal preschool, 2 years of free community college, and money for childcare. President Biden will deliver the speech on the eve of his 100th day in office. Meanwhile, U.S. President Joe Biden has signed an executive order to increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour for federal contractors. Administration officials say the order provides a pay bump to hundreds of thousands of those workers, including nursing assistants and laborers. They say workers will become more productive as a result, so the increase should not be costly to taxpayers. The increase approved under yesterday's executive order could be dramatic for workers who earn the current minimum of $10.95 an hour. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention has eased its guidelines on wearing masks outdoors, saying fully vaccinated Americans don't need to cover their faces anymore unless they are in a big crowd of strangers.
If you are fully vaccinated and want to attend a small outdoor gathering with people who are vaccinated and unvaccinated, or dine at an outdoor restaurant with friends from multiple households, the science shows if you are vaccinated, you can do so safely, unmasked.
For most of the past year, the CDC had been advising Americans to wear masks outdoors if they are within 6 feet of one another. The French presidency says 7 Italian former members of the Red Brigades have been arrested in France. The Red Brigades was a left-wing domestic terrorism group active in the 1970s and 1980s. French officials say Wednesday morning's arrests came after Italian arrest warrants were issued for acts of terrorism, and police are searching for 3 others who are not at home. European lawmakers have approved the final ratification of the post-Brexit trade deal between the European Union and the United Kingdom. After European lawmakers overwhelmingly ratified the agreement, ensuring that free trade continues between the two sides without tariffs and quotas, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson expressed hope for stability to their new relationship with the EU as vital trading partners, close allies, and sovereign equals. Chinese vaccine makers are looking at mixing their jabs and whether a booster shot could help better protect against COVID-19. Earlier this month, the head of China's Center for Disease Control, Gao Fu, said that current vaccines offer low protection against the coronavirus, and mixing them is among strategies being considered to boost their effectiveness. Mr. Gao later tried to walk back his comments, saying that he was talking in general about improving vaccine efficacy. A driver in Australia has been sentenced to 10 months in prison for what a judge described as the heartless, cruel and disgraceful filming of 4 dead and dying police officers. Richard Pussy had earlier pleaded guilty to a charge of outraging public decency over his commentary in crash scene videos shot with his phone. The 4 officers had pulled Mr. Pussy over for speeding in April last year when they were hit by a truck in an emergency stopping lane. Mr. Pussy filmed the scene. Germany's domestic intelligence agency is observing members of a group that have attacked the country's lockdown measures. The so-called Querdenker movement has held regular protests against lockdown measures, bringing together a broad range of demonstrators. The Interior Ministry said that by putting individuals and groups linked to the movement under observation, authorities will be able to collect more data and details on individuals from the scene. The Calgary Stampede is partnering with the Calgary Food Bank and Solidarity Kitchen to prepare 20,000 meals a week for 5 weeks for those in need. Cooks from the Stampede will be preparing roasted chicken, potatoes, and vegetables, which can feed up to a family of 6. The Calgary Food Bank says it is grateful for food donations that make the program possible. It says their client base has been growing since the start of the economic downturn, and when COVID-19 hit, it made the job for helping others more complex. All right, I'm Nima Rajan, and that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You could also watch all our news and commentary videos on the News Forum YouTube channel. All right, thanks for joining us today on the Forum Daily, everyone, and we'll see you next time. Take care, everyone.